Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and evening.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
And evening, everyone. Welcome to today's WCU lecture series of Department of Architecture, Faculty of Engineering, Universitas Sumatera Utara, with the first topic about design intent. First of all, I'd like to welcome the respectable head of Department of Architecture, Dr. Imam Faisal Pane, STMT IPM, the honorable all lecturers of the Department of Architecture, Universitas Sumatera Utara, and to all participants of this class. And on behalf of the head department, we welcome Mrs. Wahyuni Zahra as the head of laboratorium to give an opening speech. To Mrs. Ayu, the time and place is yours.
Terima kasih Ayah.
Yeah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera bagi kita sekalian. Terima kasih kepada semua panitia yang sudah mengarrange acara ini ya. Khusus kepada Pak Alonso Gaxiola, we welcome you, Mr. Alonso Gaxiola. It is an honor for us who are willing to share your knowledge in the academic community in Department of Architecture USU. I hope our cooperation can continue, and this lecture today will be not the only one, ya. Inshallah. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Alonso Gaxiola.
Thank you.
Terima kasih untuk bisa hadir bersama-sama di Departemen Arsitektur USU, dan kami berharap semua aktivitas akademika, mahasiswa, alumni, dosen bisa kita bisa memperoleh manfaat dari apa yang disampaikan, bisa memberikan kita inspirasi dan semangat ya untuk menciptakan karya-karya arsitektur, gagasan-gagasan arsitektur yang lebih baik dan lebih bermanfaat. Demikian Ayah, maaf saya menyampaikan juga salam dari Kepala Departemen ya, tidak bisa hadir karena ada rapat kerja fakultas di saat yang sama. Tapi saya pikir itu tidak akan mengurangi semangat dan antusias kita, dan semoga apa yang kita laksanakan hari ini bisa bermanfaat ya, dan sekali lagi menginspirasi kita untuk menghasilkan karya-karya yang lebih baik. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Yeah, waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mrs. Ayu. So basically, Mrs. Ayu is coming here to giving a welcoming speech on behalf of the head department because he have another occasion to attend and cannot present here. So let's continue to the event. I would like now to introduce our presenter today, Alonso Gaxiola. So Alonso is a Mexican architect with over 10 years of experience in the field. He commenced his career in 2009 at the award-winning Mexican firm 10 Arquitectos before becoming a partner at the residential-oriented firm Gaxiola Arquitectos in 2012. In 2016, he migrated to Australia to pursue a Master of Architecture degree at RMIT University, which he completed in 2018. Currently, Alonso is a senior associate at Paul Morgan Architects. Alonso commenced his academic career in 2018, running a Bachelor of Architecture studio at RMIT University, and has continued and now in Monash University, and has continued to deliver studios uninterruptedly since. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate into this event. So please keep your camera on and mute your microphone during the presentation. We will have Q&A time after the lecture done. And we will welcome you to open mic later on, or you can also have a question in chat box. You may send in your question at any time during the presentation. We will collect this and address them during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. And now, please welcome Mr. Gex. Gex, the times and the place is yours.
Thank you very much, Aya. I'm going to share my screen. Thanks for that introduction. You basically stole my introduction. So I'm gonna,
Sorry for that, but it's
I'm gonna
okay.
have to cut
Like
mine a
it.
little bit short.
Okay.
Let's see. Please tell me if you can see my screen. Is it all good? Great.
Yes,
Okay.
all good.
Thanks. So, well, good afternoon to everyone in Indonesia. Good evening to those who might be here in Australia. I'd like to start by thanking Aya and USU for inviting me to this semester's lecture series. I really appreciate the opportunity to join the architectural discourse at USU, and I hope you enjoy the 3 lectures I prepared for you in the following weeks. Tonight's lecture is titled Design Intent, and here I'll try to make a little bit of a case for the use of this word and its underlying meaning instead of the more traditional architectural concept. So as I was saying, I stole my introduction, so I'll be quick. I'd like to introduce myself really quickly. I will only do this on the first time. So as I was saying, I'm originally from Mexico. I worked at Ten Arquitectos, a firm that did a lot of urban work and educational work. Then I became a director of Gaxiola Arquitectos in 2012. And in 2014, I started Studio Gax as a space to develop ideas that don't fit the traditional architectural brief or output. So kind of different things that are also within the realm of what I do, but they are not specifically buildings. As I was saying, I migrated to Australia in 2016. I completed my Master's of Architecture at RMIT in 2018. And I currently work at Paul Morgan Architects. We do a lot of educational design. Our clients are the universities here in Australia and the TAFEs. I teach both design studio and another subject called technology performance, where we try to sort of link environmental performance to design in buildings and 3D modeling. And I also continue my work on Studio Gax in projects on my free time. So I think a way to define what I do, or a simple way to define my practice, is that I draw. You know, I draw for a firm with a lot of constraints and technical deadlines. I draw for a university, which means that I have to teach and do exhibitions and other stuff. I draw for personal clients, which is similar to what I do for a firm, but probably more free. And I draw for myself to explore ideas, for fun, to communicate. So having said that, let's go back to tonight's topic. This lecture is divided into 3 sections. First, number 1, I'd like to define the way I interpret the concept of design intent, or this idea of design intent, followed by the work I do at S2S, Spencer to Spring, which is the design studio I lead at Monash University. And I'll talk there about how the idea of design intent is connected very closely to the design studio, and how that keeps evolving in a way with the methodology we created for that. And finally, in the last section, I'm just gonna talk about contemporary precedents. One in particular, like there's many examples of these, but I think there's one very good one that I'd like to show you guys. So let's start with section number 1, definition and comparison of intent to concept. Right, so I think in order to compare design intent and design concept, we need to first sort of get a basic definition of that, right? So if we look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the entry for both of them, we can see that intent means the thing that you plan to do or achieve, right? And aim, a purpose. I don't know if I'm gonna be saying this right. Maybe Aya, you can correct me. Maksud, is that how you pronounce that? Hopefully that's the correct way. And then on the other hand, we've got a concept, which is an idea of what something is or how it works, how it looks like. As you can see, the difference is kind of very clear, right? Intent refers to what you want to do, right? Concept is an idea of what something is or how it looks like. So because intent has a purpose, you know, we're saying that intent is has an aim, is trying to achieve something, then you can quantify it, meaning that you can tell if your actions or the goals were achieved. If you know, in the end, you set out to do something, did you actually do that? Whereas concept, being just an idea, is very abstract, very subjective. Let's say I might have an idea of what something should look like, but maybe I have a different view on that same concept. So this makes it very hard to quantify success. You know, it's hard to say if Aya is right or I am right, because there are really there's no way to define who's wrong or who's right. So this idea of being able to quantify or measure success is very important. You know, that's how we know if a project is good or not. Right? So if a project is capable of conveying its concept clearly, then people, most of the time, thinks it's a successful project. So keep in mind that architecture is predominantly designed and judged to be experienced with the eyes, right? By what we see, how it looks like, which I don't think it's great, but it's just where we are at this point in time. So I've got here for you an example, which is probably one of my favorites that I really like to use. So the concept in this building is very simple. The building is for a football team called the Richmond Tigers. The building was made to look like a tiger. So the concept is clear, and I understand the marketing implications behind the idea and the sort of concept of tying together the building and the team and the colors, but why should the building look like a tiger, right? What is the benefit of it? What are we gaining? How does this impact how you experience the space inside or outside, or the structural design? Or more importantly, the relationship of the building to its immediate context, right? Why is it important for the building to look like a tiger if it's just sitting in the middle of a city, right? In this case, one could argue that it just doesn't, you know, there's no benefit for the building to look like a tiger. So I guess that raises the question, is a building successful only because the concept is easy to identify, right? In this example, is it successful just because it looks like a tiger? How do we measure if this building is successful? Is the only thing that we can interpret is the concept of it looking like a tiger, or the tiger too, right? So I think with that question in mind, right, trying to sort of understand how to measure success and how to measure the success of a concept, I set out to define architectural intent. So this definition expanded into a methodology, which I'll later talk about, and that became Sensor to Spring, the design studio. And it's a definition I'm going to read for you out loud. So the concept is superficial, subjective. Its success depends on the architect's ability of to convey a vision, which is most of the time informed by a current trend or a preconceived formal outcome, right? At the beginning, I sit down with the client and he says, we are the tigers, the building has to look like a tiger. So then that's it, right? That's it's subjective. So in exploring this, when I was sort of creating this design studio, we came up with this definition alternative to concept for intent, which reads like this. Intent suggests that a building is designed to perform in a certain way, right? That it provides or nurtures specific spatial, experiential, or urban conditions. It sets a mood, it generates atmospheres, intent can be applied at different scales. Most importantly, a building can have different intents depending on what it's approaching or what problems it's trying to solve. In other words, intent identifies a problem and designs a solution to it. This way, it's irrelevant how the project looks like. The important thing is that the building is successful in operating in a certain way, that it's capable of saying this is a problem, this is what the building is going to do to either solve the problem or to address the problem, right? What's the position of the building against the city, against your neighbors, against a brief, for example. So intent requires a deep understanding of the project context and the issues in the brief in order to address them in a precise way. So I suppose in contrary concept, before you start designing anything in this idea of intent, you need to really understand where you are situated. What are the constraints of your site? What are the constraints in the city? What's happening around you? What is good that's happening around you? That's something that, you know, it's not always a problem. Sometimes intent can be used to maximize something that's already happening and it's been functioning and working well. So that means that even before you draw the first line, you need to sort of understand where you are so that you know what you're facing and you have an idea or an intent to try to achieve. But predominantly at bachelor's level. So by now we have a method that's been iterated and transformed in a way, but there's a lineage to it. It started with 3 simple steps, and those 3 simple steps that I'm going to define later on are still there today. You know, what we set to do early in 2019. Next week that I have finals for this final iteration called dark mode, we're doing the same thing. So in order to test the idea of intent, and because it was helpful for a design studio as well, I have to set a parameter or a site, an extended site for the studio. So we decided to go with the Huddle grid. For those that are not familiar with Melbourne, the Huddle grid is the rectilinear grid that marks the CBD. It was the first grid that was laid in the city. It's got a particular orientation, and it starts with Spencer on the west, sorry, and moves all the way to Spring Street on the east, hence the name of the studio. So the studio is interested in understanding Melbourne, particularly the Huddle grid, by cataloging the events that make the city so unique. Well, I think with this definition, you can, and with the methodology we're trying to sort of finesse, you can interchange Melbourne to any city or the Huddle grid for any grid. The important thing is here that the method is kind of flexible enough to be applied elsewhere. But in this case, because I live in Melbourne and the studios I run are here, the Huddle grid was an easy way to have a base to test against. So the studio has developed a design methodology to translate events, which I will define later, into precedents to inform architectural design. In other words, to inform intent, right? So in 2 simple words, we look at the city, we sort of understand the city, and the city basically translates into intent. It gives us the tools to come up with architectural intent. So there's a few keywords here that I think are important to sort of understand. So by event, we mean the soul of the city, right? Whatever my students are experiencing. Moments, conversations, interactions, building elements, existing systems, the way you like to go from your house to work, it's free. And the idea with this is that allows students to be interested in what they're doing, right? There is no topic. Generally, there is the idea of finding events. And if I'm interested in scaffolding, that can become an event and I can pursue that. If another student is interested in the way people line up outside sneakers shops to wait for the latest sneakers to be available, that's also an event. Again, the Huddle grid is basically the main source of information in the studio. You know, it's there and we use it and we sort of investigate it and we try to get systems out of it. And what do we mean by cataloging? Where it's basically to investigate in order to understand the city and to index it, right? To sort of compile it, to create a set of drawings that represent the city at a given point in time. Because in the end, we're architects, we need to sort of understand what it is and how we document projects. And the best way to do that is by actually documenting stuff. So we use the city as a test for that as well. The studio design methodology is split into 3 stages. First, we do the cataloging, as I was saying, where we look closely at the events occurring in the city. We find a system, a very simple diagram, and then we draw these events using traditional architectural representation, sections, plans, elevations, etc. The second part of the studio, I think it's the key part of the studio, which we call reimagination. During this stage, we understand the city, so we first cataloged it. During reimagination, we understand how it's operating. We understand what the parts are, and what's occurring. And then we come up with a new way to put those parts together, completely free. We just reconfigure it. The only sort of thing that needs to occur in this stage is that it needs to be faithful to the system, right? You can have a door and reimagine that into a bus station, but only if it's faithful to how it operates. And finally, in the third stage of the methodology, we use what we've already learned and the first test in the reimagination now with a more precise brief, right? The reimagination is very free. You're free to do whatever you want, just making sure it follows the system. In the next stage, you need to follow the system, but respond to a brief. You know, there'll be rooms to draw, and there'll be a program, and there'll be a client, and there'll be a real site, right? So there'll be real constraints to real architectural work. And that way, we can actually test if this method of designing is actually a good method to design architecture. Which, by the way, it's in process, and that, you know, I just cannot say this is the perfect method, but it's something that we've been working on for 3 years, and I think we've come up with some good results. So this is how a cataloging entry might look like. You will find an event, the image of it, how it looks in reality. So what you see on the left is, in this case, the county clerk in Victoria. We have a little map that shows where this event is happening. We have the location of it, you know, the address of it. And we come up with a very simple diagram, right? That says, okay, this event, which is a revolving door, in this case, in the county court, it's operating in this way. It's the threshold between A, the city, and B, the inside of the building, right? So that means that there is an element, in this case, the door, that is driving the interaction between the city and the building. Very simple, right? And that way, if the system is simple, then you can apply it later on to different things. So in this case, the system name, which you see in the bottom, was called interaction with an element. And this was the cataloging result for it, right? So it's a plan. It's a plan of what's happening in the city with enough detail and information for us to understand some of the important conditions, right? We can see that inside of the building, it's a bank, and there's a waiting area, and there might be a teller, and there is a door in the middle of the space, which is particularly a revolving door, which spins around. And then outside, it's completely different, right? It's an outdoor space. It's a little plaza where people might sit in a bench to read or have a conversation, go out for a smoke. And it's clear here that the element that connects them both, the building element in this case, it's a revolving door, and it became the focus of the investigation. So in this cataloging particularly, what the students were looking at is how you have to interact with the door, right? You need to push it, you need to touch it, you need to move around it or with it. So that created an idea for a reimagination, which was basically a element, in this case, the pole, that allow for 2 things. Remember, inside A, and be outside the city and the bank to operate, right? So in this case, the pole was driving the very specific movements and the choreography for a ballerina, and she had to move around the pole and work her way around a specific sort of dance, let's call it that way. But on the other hand, the same pole could be twisty and bendy and become a bench, and the same pole might be steps, or you could skate on it, or it could be a line that defines the pedestrian path or a bike path, right? So the imaginations are free. They're not meant to be very precise architectural drawings. They are more about understanding that the system is an element that connects two things. What can I do with that? Okay, so having an understanding of that, or a brief understanding of the methodology, I'm going to show you two projects of the application stage. These projects are from year 2 and year 1 students. So some of them are just starting their journey in architecture. Some of them are, you know, a little bit more advanced, but in reality, the outcome of the drawings is pretty equal. So I'm going to talk about this application stage. So part of the application stage is to have an initial assessment. As I was saying before, for intent to be successful, you need to be really close to the site. You need to understand the constraints, understand the possibilities of the site, sort of understand where you are, what the problems are, what the good things are that you can explore later on. So in this case, the 2020 site that we had was a site in between a major street called Lonsdale and Little Burke. So the initial assessment was that the site sits in an area where two very different zones of the city meet, right? So a soft transition between these very different areas would be desirable, right? Like it would be good to have this gradual change between the very busy and kind of office-like area in the north, which is Lonsdale. So you can see these big buildings, and there's a shopping mall and a huge office building here where my cursor is. And at the bottom, Little Burke, which is Chinatown in Melbourne, which is a very narrow street with a lot of pedestrian traffic, with a lot of things happening, and smells and commerce and people screaming, and you know, it's a very rich area of the city. So we saw that this site had the potential to communicate the two different sides of the city, and that became the project intent, right? We are trying to ask students to come up with a project that acts as an urban threshold. The intent was have the building operate as an urban threshold that connects both sides of the city physically and creating a slow transition between the two sides of the city. I think just a quick parenthesis here, but what we mean by threshold is that point in between two different things, right? This sort of moment of transition between A and B. And threshold is always associated with change, right? So we came up with this nice little formula to define a threshold, which means that you need to go from A to either A or B or C via C, which is the threshold, right? You need to go through something that is different to the two sides. So that made really sense for this side, because we have the two very different sides, north and south, and our side was this very clear and compact C that could operate as a threshold, and we're trying to achieve change, right? In a threshold, if you're in A, you need to go through C to get to B, which means that if you were in A, you ended in B. There's a change from A to B. So this first project by Caleb looked at a building that was operating as a threshold by providing spaces related to food. He realized that the food that Little Burke has a very close relationship to food, being Chinatown. But he also realized that on the north side, Lonsdale Street, the act of eating during lunch is very important. And he realized that there was a lot of people going from the busy city center through the site into Chinatown to eat. So he set out to come up with a project that provided a number of different sort of food opportunities in between them two, and they were connected with kitchens that were slowly changing from a very traditional sort of Chinese cuisine to a completely more sort of international cuisine on the other side. So his building was a very linear building full of kitchens and spaces to eat that created this in-between space, this threshold space between the two very sides of the different sides of the city. So in plan, you can see this is just a ground floor plan where you can see these different cooking spaces and different eating spaces throughout the length of the site, and how he decided to connect using the kitchen bench as an element that came out of the building into the footpath, went then outside into the forecourt, and back in here in the gray area to a different set of kitchens. And that helped to connect all the way to Little Berg, Chinatown on the right side of the screen. So this building created a physical threshold, as we were trying to do. That's part of the intent of the project, was to link the two sides physically, but also to do it slowly. And his approach to slow, or to this gradual change, became with a gradual change, like was reflected in a gradual change of elevation. So his project started flat, then went down into the ground, as you can see in the section, and at some point went up enough to clear some important buildings that he was using as a reference in Chinatown. And then it had another level up, as you can see in the final part. So there was this gradual approach to change, not only in the form of the building, as you can see, it's kind of lower building, the north end, which responds to that street, then how it went up, creating a large atrium. Then it had these sort of openings and trusses to bring light into the building, which represented or had a little bit of a relationship to the existing context. And then the two levels in this very sort of narrow bar that related to the narrow streets in Chinatown. But again, the form of the building, the way we kind of drove the design of this project was that the form of the way it looked like was irrelevant. He was able to achieve what he was trying to do. So this is Lina's project, which is very different, but it's the same site. And they were two different studios. So one was first and the other second. In Lina's project, the approach was different in terms of creating a completely a path of connection with no obstacles. She realized that part of the project, the problem between these two sides, was that the very narrow linking walkway connecting them both was uncomfortable and hard to navigate. So she realized that her project had to provide a very wide public space to encourage people to go through it and then go through the narrow edge, right? To use it as a slow transition between the busy side of the city into her project, which was this very good plaza that then slowly narrowed down and became a laneway in the city. So her project, if you see on the left side, the ground floor plan is completely open, and it's got a visual strategy that links to the angles in the way the city was oriented, the photo grid, and then it created this completely open threshold that went from the city to an internal plaza to a narrow walkway at the bottom. And in terms of program, she decided to tackle these via culture. So she realized that the two sides of the city were very different. So in this case, she used that as a benefit, right? If you think about intent, I was saying that sometimes you are looking to solve a problem, but sometimes you can look at how to enhance something that's good. So she said, okay, there's a clash in cultures between the North and the South. So I'm gonna come up with an artist studio specifically for these two different types of cultures to coexist. So she prepared studios for making, basically designing and fabricating, which were given to half of them to a population from Chinatown and Little Berg, the other half to a population of students, which are on the north side of the city, and they got to interact there and use culture as a driver to this threshold idea, right? So I thought that was a very successful way of integrating or not trying to use the problem in the site, but use the good things about it. So I think as a summary of what this studio does or what we try to do is we look at the city as a precedent for intent. We look at what's there, we find systems, and we try to use these systems to be applied to a project in particular. We're interested in cataloging what happens in the city as well, because we are also interested in the way the city is evolving and changing. And in the end, this studio has compiled a big number of catalog entries, which represent the way this city looks like today or in the last 2 years. And why are we doing this? As I was saying, we're developing this methodology and we needed something to test it with. And the good thing about this test in the last 2 years is that the methodology has evolved in the way that we apply it, but it hasn't evolved in the main part of it, which means that the sort of the bones of it are working good. And what are we looking for in the end with these projects? Are projects that perform in a way that is directly and evidently informed by the city, right? Which again goes back to the idea of it. But I think before moving on to the final section, I'd like to share with you guys on the chat a link in case you're interested in looking at this with more detail. Okay. There. And I'm going to share with you what you might find. So, if you click on that link, you will find a small sort of compilation of the work the studio's done so far. There's 2 links that you can click. If you click the top one, you can navigate to these, which is the exhibition for one of these studios. You can see the entire catalog. If you click here, you can see the guest lecturers we had, some of the midterm reimaginations, the studio mat, which was another dynamic that we also like to do. And if you click to the bottom, you can see each of and every project and the way that was applied. And the second link, this is the work of this semester. So it's not work in progress, but it's not completed. So here you can navigate through the events that were produced this semester, and you can click around and see the different systems, the different plans, and the different reimaginations for each. So hopefully you'll find that interesting at any point you want to revisit that. So I'm going to share my other screen again, and I'm going to move on to the final section of this tonight's lecture, which is called Contemporary Precedents. And it's not a super big section, but I think I'd like to share you one project. This project is called Quinta Monroy Housing. It's in Chile, South America, and it's by Studio Elemental, or just Elemental, which is run by Alejandro Aravena. And this has been going on. The project is from 2001, 2004, but it's really an open-ended project, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So, Studio Elemental, as I was saying, they're based in Chile. They're a very small firm. I think there's 6 or 7 people that work with Alejandro. And if you go to their website, you can actually download the drawings for the project that I'm going to show you. Every CAD drawing that you need to build this project. It's free, it's open source, it's for everyone. A bit of background, Alejandro Aravena is a Pritzker laureate, so he's a big name in architecture. He won the Pritzker in 2015. He's a teacher at Harvard. He lectures at the Instituto Universitario de Arquitectura in Venice. He's taught at the Architectural Association in London. So he's a big thinker in architecture, in today's architecture, contemporary architecture. So let's go back to this project in particular, right? Quinta Monroy Housing. As you can see, it's a very basic project, but it goes with the idea of that I was telling you before of not being very interested in how the building looks like, but how the building performs. So this diagram you can find within the downloads that you can get on their website, and it's their little sort of project diagram. So they were thinking to themselves, I'm sorry, I'm just going to stop there for a second and go back to the sentence that I forgot. But one thing that Alejandro likes to say is that they approach every project with a big question mark. They don't know what the project's going to be. They don't know how it's going to look like. They don't even know if it's going to be a building. And I think that there's a lot of merit in that, you know. I think it's important to think of what we do, not only as people who produce buildings. I think there's more skills in architecture. And also there's more results. You know, we don't always have to build a new building. We can program things, we can come up with social strategies. There's a lot of different ways that architects can work with space that doesn't necessarily mean building new space. Anyway, so these guys approach the problem as a big question mark. They don't know what's going to be. But in their diagram, they said, let's make sure that we balance three things: low rise, high density, no overcrowding, and the possibility of expansion. So this project, the initial assessment, is located in a very poor area of Chile. And that's another reason why I decided to show this project, because that I feel close to it, because this happens a lot in Mexico as well. Like the project that I'm going to show you it's a great example of what they should be doing in Mexico, and they've started doing. But the reality is that, you know, that these big government projects don't approach it this way. And poverty it's an important problem. And I think this project addresses this problem in a very good way. So the initial assessment is a middle-class family may inhabit a house of, let's say, 80 square meters, whereas a low-income family might be lucky enough to inhabit a 40 square meter house. So this project is, of course, for a social housing project. So the low-income family, they can afford a large, good house, right? So they often end up with small houses in building blocks where they are really constrained, right? They can only afford a certain amount of space at this stage in their life. They make an investment for that, and they end up stuck with that. So the initial assessment was, why not give them half a good house instead of a very tiny, incomplete house? So the project intent was to apply incrementality, right? So the capacity to grow as a model to allow owners to expand their units and their houses accordingly to what they need. So this was very successful in two things. First, it gave the final users agency to do whatever they wanted, right? If you like pink walls inside, you can do that. If you would like your house to be one single room, you can do that. If you have two kids and you need to split it, you can do that as well. If you don't have the money to do that now, you can split it next year. So I think it proved that the model doesn't necessarily need to be a finished building, but allow someone to grow with it. To do this, they gave themselves these sort of very specific points. The initial design had to provide things that are hard to build, right? Because we're not asking people to buy half a house and then have to build footings and slabs and all of those things that are complicated and costly, right? So the hard stuff was given: services, structural, circulation, main external walls for the basic needs. Then these elements cannot be built individually, right? So the idea is that this is not a standalone little house. You need to form a community. That was part of the idea of incrementality and social housing. And finally, that what you're designing will guarantee the common good in the future, right? So there's some set of constraints. That means that there is a basic framework for the system to operate once it's completed, but it's equally good if it's not complete. So a couple of notes with this project. There is no mention of an architectural concept or how it needs to look like, or if it's going to be pink, square, or round. The focus is on how the building is supposed to perform, right? It needs to grow, it needs to provide for flexibility now and later. It needs to have basic stuff built into it. It needs to not be built individually. It needs to guarantee the common good. You know, there are goals to fulfill, not tigers, not striped tigers, but things that we want to do. And of course, that's not how the building looks. So if you see a typical plan for level 1 in this case, what is dashed is what's not built, and what you see not dashed or solid lines is what the design provides initially. So the initial design provides a space where my cursor is with services, a plumbed in sink, a toilet in another level, a staircase, basic windows for the basic module, stairs to go outside to the common space, doors, right? Everything you need to move in there if you need to move in tomorrow or if you want. But it also gives you an entire platform next to it where you can do whatever you want. You get the freedom to decide if you want it to be an outdoor space, if you want it to be an extension of the external space or the top space, if you want it to be a garden, if you want it to be a studio, whatever you want, right? And they come up with these basic layout configurations, which you see that as suggestions, right? If you want, you can expand one of the designs to have, let's say, this partition here, but it's just a suggestion, right? That the basic module allows you to do that, but you don't have to do it. If you want to, you can select. And this is a typical plan of the next level up, where you can see, that the other plumbing services, the stair, and again, these voids in between, which allow for growth. So this is how the basic design looks like on the left. And on the right, it's the extended design, right? If I am the owner of this unit and I want to build another new house for another person, I know I can fit it there. If I want it to be yellow and with timber doors, I can do it. If I want my windows to be big, small, black or white, I can do it. I get that agency, right? I'm not constrained with the initial 40 square meters that I received. I get the chance to grow out of it, to kind of get more money later on, build more. Or if I don't want to, it can just remain open, right? But there's a choice. And this means that the entire complex operates that way. No one knows how it's going to look when they start the project. They know how some of it might look because there's some given pieces of it. But in the end, it's all driven by the user. The final result is going to be what whoever lives there decides it to be. So again, you can see this in section as well, right? You can see the big voids. You can see the spaces that are given, the stuff that is important to live in, like plumbed in fixtures and stairs and walls and roof, right? But then the capacity to grow and to have more space. So I think that the brilliant thing of this project is that this project is actually 4 projects. The one I show you is in Chile, but then they took the same model and went to Monterrey and built it. And it looks similar, but it's not the same, right? You can see some changes. You can see a basic sort of kind of evolution of the first project, but it's different. And then they went to another city in Chile and built another one, which, again, it's an evolution of it, but it's still there. And you can see the infill section, for example, here against the sort of original section here. And the third example, again in Chile, where the idea is similar, right? But the end result, the formal result, how it looks like, it's completely different, right? And it's not up to the architect to decide, it's for a person to decide. But that's all I have prepared for you guys tonight. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about what I like to do the most, which is teaching and drawing and looking at buildings. And I'm more than happy to field any questions you might have or to start a conversation with whoever might want to start a conversation. Thanks, Aya.
Okay, thank you, Gex. Oh, it's a wonderful presentation. I
Thanks,
see
Aya.
there's a lot. I see there's a lot of things that need to be discussed, but we can discuss it later on because the most important now we will open a question for all the students or anyone in participants. Do anyone have question? Please raise hand or you can put your question in chat box. Is there any question? Um, oh, wait, sorry. Okay, Gex. So there's a several thing that I've been mentioned maybe while waiting. Oh, there's already a question. So let's see the first question. It's also from the lecture of architecture department. It's from Mansuri. So, dear Mr. Alonso, how to deal with students with online and distance learning system, where they may not have an idea of the new studio project, presentation techniques, or etc. When compared to before the pandemic, they can observe their senior project studio. How to deal with the absence of knowledge transfer process between the different generation before the pandemic, or maybe Mr. Mansur, can you ask your question?
I think that's okay. Thanks
Okay.
for reading it out, and I read it on the chat as well. And I think it's a great question. It's something that we've been dealing with in the last couple of years, and I think it's been really, really hard. To answer the first part of the question and how to deal with students online, social distancing, and not being able to actually go to the city, um, it was really tough. We utilized a lot of Google Street View to come up with events to catalog. But the reality is that the way these events function was really kind of compromised because students didn't have a chance to interact with the city that much. The end results were good because once you find the system, you can really kind of develop it further. But that connection to the physical and built environment is really missed. Um, in terms of presentation techniques and the studio projects, we use a lot of examples. You know, like I think we're lucky that we've been able to run this studio for 3 years now, which means that there's a lot of precedence within our little world. You know, there's different projects, different representation techniques, different events, different systems that we can pull out, go into the website, check out one of the entries, and show that to the students. So I think on that hand, the use of technology has been great. You know, it's allowed us to compile everything that's been generated and to share it again with the next sort of group of students. The second part of your question, when compared to before the pandemic, they can, like I think this is really, really important. So that sort of relationship and the knowledge that you get from your peers is crucial. And I think that's, again, one of the main problems that we found. So we've been trying to do what we call peer review sessions, in which we not only ask our students to lead the session, but we bring in other studios that are different to ours. So we just mix the two studios. We get them to present their ideas and to be driving the conversation. We as tutors, we try to take a step back and let them go. And you see that organically, these sort of little groups start forming. And then there are some breakout rooms where a few students are talking about one project and then some others jump into it. And they try to have that conversation that you might have walking on a physical building and looking at someone's work and saying, hey, that looks great. What studio is that? What are you doing? What project is that? You know, so all of that's lost during the pandemic. We tried to replicate in the digital world. I wouldn't say it was 100% successful because I don't think we will ever get to a point where we can communicate in the same way that as we do physically. But I think it helped. It also helped in terms of breaking the monotony of the studio Zoom class. You know, it's really hard to teach studio via Zoom, where you cannot draw, you cannot sketch, you cannot engage with two people at the same time because of the microphone. So I think the sessions become hard to follow and a bit tedious and boring as well. You know, not because the subject is boring or the program or the building is boring, it's because sometimes the feedback does not apply to you and you're still sitting there, you know, kind of listening to this feedback. So I think there's ways to do this. We've tried to sort of mix other things that are not architecture, for example, and we've been putting together two studios, one playlist where everyone puts a song in it, and then we have to play it, and different students kind of cooperate in that. We had a dance class once and a yoga session as well. So we tried to make it as lively as possible to sort of, you know, make two studios meet. You know, like there's other students there that you would have met in the hallways. Here they are. Share some songs with them, and maybe you make a friend. Hopefully. Does that answer the question? I suppose.
Yeah, is it answered the question, Mr. Mansuri? But basically, Gex, so is it start to offline again, the school now, or it's still online
I think next semester we're gonna be back on campus.
to
Which is
normal?
great. Yeah, which means that we can do a lot of stuff that we couldn't do. You know, like physical models and like there's a lot of things that we just can't do digitally, which or you know, that some studios are asking students to do it, but I find no purpose to that. You know, I don't think my students should waste time doing physical models if they're just gonna
Yeah.
show it in the camera. So you know, I think I'm very happy that we'll be able to do some of that stuff. You know, I really like hand drawings and physical models and collages. That's an important part of our studio that we had to put aside during the pandemic, and I can't wait to be doing that again.
Yeah, it's been pretty hard if you want to see the physical of the things because of this pandemic. But yeah, but the intent, yes, you told me before it's maksud, yeah.
So
Your
yeah, yeah,
pronunciation, yeah, yeah, your pronunciation is good. So
great,
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so it's great.
nice.
Yeah. So yeah. So the thing is, yeah, I'll recap it a bit. So the intent was to aim something, then while the concept only saying about the idea. That's why it's not really finishing the project. It's a start. So the intent is you guys trying to make it until it finished, right? So how this project starting. So yeah, it's I think it's pretty cool because that's how everything should be. Like the design need to have intent to be something, not only this is the idea and this is what it looks like, but it's more to what I aim to do it, and then this is it look like, but there's a reason behind it, like that, right?
Yeah, and I think that goes well to the question on the chat at the moment by Tenku. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that right. He's asking, does the appearance of a building not really matter as long as performance of the building is in accordance with how the buildings should function? So I think, thanks for the question. I'm going to say that it's not that it doesn't matter. I think it means that I am no one to tell you how it should look, right? If you want your building to look like a big tower made out of circles and looks like, I don't know, like just stacked donuts, that's okay. You know, you are the designer. I think that's a good thing about this idea of intent is that you get to design whatever you want without having to say, oh, it looks like this president and this tower from OMA, but it also looks like a tower of donuts, right? Like to me, it's irrelevant how you want it to look like. It's important to you, and it should be important to you, because in the end, we are kind of, you know, we are creating physical things, and we're interested in how they're detailed, how they're put together, how they look, which materials they have, right? But that should be your decision, not a decision made based on my client is a tiger, so it needs to look like a tiger, you know? It should be whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you want to do. So intent gives you a way to do whatever you want by performing in a way. Now, it's successful only if it does ends up doing what you're trying to do. If you try to do, if you were trying to do something and you don't get there, and then you cannot explain your building with a concept, then you're out. You don't have anything, you know? So yeah, I don't think it's irrelevant. It's freedom for you to design what you want.
Yes, that's why I'll always mention to them, there's not a building that beautiful or ugly. So there's no bad and wrong in bad or good in architecture, but how you uh, delivered your intention or your idea, that's how it is. How the building will performance to the owner, how the user gonna use it nicely or comfortable in that building. So So there's never be an ugly or beautiful or what building, because everyone have the different taste or types of what the building they like. So basically there's no I mean, like, of course, as architect, we try to make the appearance as good as what we intend to, but how people will read it or see it will be different for each of them. So that's why we try to make our intent as good as we aim to. That's
Yeah,
that's how they did it. Yeah.
that's a very common and a very good comment. And I think just to sort of to complete that comment is that in the end, we are going to be inside the building, right? We are not going to be looking at the outside from the inside. So we
Yeah.
need to make sure that the spaces we design are what we need to, right? Like if we're designing a kitchen, then it's a kitchen that works well, right? And it, again, the intent of that small scale is for you to be able to make a sandwich or to cook a meal, right? So who cares if it's red or black, right? If I'm happy with the red and I can create a sandwich there, then what's the difference? So I think we need to start thinking about the spaces that we create and how we are comfortable within them. And if the outside, you know, if you can nail that, then the rest of it can be up to you, right? But we need to put ourselves into these things that we're building and make sure that we're designing for people and not just because I want the building to look like a tiger or a rock.
Okay. Is that answering your question, Zafran?
Yes, it's answering. Thank thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Thank you. It's a good question, Zafran. Okay. So we'll go to the next question. There's Azra here joining us from Studio 3. So Zahran also from, sorry, why is wrong? Okay. Oh, okay, Azra, can you hear?
Yes.
Okay, so just tell us your question, please.
I have a question for Mr. Gax. And if we go back to Caleb's design,
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, it's a restaurant, right?
that's correct. It's a combination of different restaurants. You know, it's a different eating spaces and food preparation space.
Yeah, and here's the philosophy of that represents thresholds and elevating, and also the narrow of Chinatown, right? And my question is, do we, as an architect, have an obligation to, make the visitors know that the philosophy that we put into the building? Like, do we have to make the visitors understand the intent that we have in the building?
I think that it's great, Aquila. Is that
It's Azra.
Azra?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's a great question because that really talks about the difference between concept and intent, right? With concept, we're trying to create something that everyone can identify, right? You see it, it looks like a tiger. I know the concept is a tiger, right? But intent is something that you experience. Maybe I don't need to kind of feel, right? Like you know that I'm in this side of town and there's this kind of mix of food and we're all getting into this central space where we can share, right? Like it just happens organically. You don't need the architect to be standing there saying, hey, by the way, the concept is a tiger, you know? I think um, because it's not following just does, you know what I mean? And with a concept, if it kind of looks like a tiger with all rock, then you would need someone there to be standing saying, well, the concept is a breed between a tiger and a rock. You know, like you would need someone to explain it. And you don't want to be standing next to the building all day explaining to everyone what you're building. You just need it to, you know, to perform and to work, and to operate. Sometimes, which is the greatest thing of this, and I suppose once you test it out, maybe the project that I show you towards the end that it's already been built, it will be great to find surprises, right? Like you set out to do this, but in the end, it happened completely different, right? Like you allow for something to grow out spontaneously. So what happens if in that social project they would build a nightclub in one of those little spaces? Or I don't know, like what if the user becomes really creative and builds something completely out of the box? Then automatically your intent was still correct to allow for expansion, but it's not actually what it was originally thought of, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Does that kind of answer the question?
I'm sorry, Gex. I think Azra lost the connection because she's not here anymore. But it's okay.
Okay.
I'll record this presentation to tell her. And I tried to contact her, but I think her connection is lost.
That's okay.
Okay. So maybe we can go to the next question before Azra back. There's someone that raised hand before. Is it Sutramani? Is it right? Or not? Hello? Okay, Azra's just joining back. Is there any question? Atau ada yang mau pakai bahasa Indonesia, nanti saya translatekan juga boleh. So I'm just asking them if they want to ask in Indonesian, I can translate it for them.
Oh,
Later on.
maybe by the end of the year I'll learn something, a little bit of
Yeah,
Indonesian.
but you already learned a lot from me, right?
Oh, I can't remember all of that.
Did you still remember how are you in Indonesian?
No. You're gonna have to teach me again.
Okay, then later on I'll teach you. Maybe you can learn from Rafid too.
Probably.
Okay, yeah. Is there any question? Maybe. Oh, Gex. I saw all the students' works are really interesting. How long did it take for them to do the project? Is it only one or what?
So with the our design methodology, as I was saying, it's kind of these 3 stages,
Okay.
and we do the first half of the semester all the way until midterm, like really intense, and you don't do anything about the project. You're just looking at the city, finding elements, cataloging, reimagining the system, all that, and learn how to apply systems into projects. But before midterm, they don't know what the site is, what the brief is. They don't know anything. And that way they can really focus in catalog. And once we go after midterm, we say, that's the site, this is the brief. So the projects are developed in 5 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks.
Okay, 5 to 6 weeks. So basically, after the research, and then they done it, right?
Exactly.
Oh, it's right. Oh, so it's interesting. So they choose their own site, right? Is it that it? Or do
No, I give them the site, which I try to investigate before to understand if it's got capacity for a good intent, or what are the constraints, or if there's good things happening around it. And the one of the main things that we do is no demolition. I try to find sites that have nothing on them, which there are not many, or we try to use, let's say, in this sem we're using a rooftop, for example. So we're building on top of another building, which is a car park. Or sometimes we build in this space in between 2 buildings. So I think we're trying not to demolish, but to sort of propose things with the existing something.
Yeah, that's why all the designs really look interesting. I saw like the lines and everything like have every meaning on it, right? Okay, so yep. I think this Sutramanik chat me directly. Maybe he wrong to send it, but yeah, I'll read it from him. Sutramanik mau nanya sendiri atau gimana? Saya tanyakan. Okay. So Mr. Alonso, do students there run an apprenticeship system, or is it just a theoretical lecture process?
It's just a theoretical project. We of course we don't build these things. And in terms of apprenticeships, there are apprenticeships in practice generally in the city, and it is kind of encouraged by universities, but they don't do an apprenticeship with my studio at the moment. They do, so for example, we do have a student working here at the office with us, but that's working on a completely different thing. In the office, we do um, real life projects for real clients where there's very little room to move around. I've tried to apply this philosophy to a certain extent, but it's also not my business, not my firm. I just work here, so I cannot make every decision. But yeah, there are some internship opportunities.
Yep. So yeah, I know the system is for the apprenticeship is there's a bit there, but I even for me, I don't do architecture project for another job. Like I only do the studio because we don't have the I don't have the time if it's another job. But the thing is, uh no, they rarely put an studio project to a what a job like that. So
Yeah,
basically it's yeah, we only do the studio things in studios, not in the real life, the work.
yeah. But I think there's something that I like to add, and it's something that I've also been trying to push with the universities I've worked with, is that at the moment that the link between the academic world and practice, the real life architecture and unis, it's just it's separated very much. There is nothing linking what we do in class to what we
Plus, yeah.
need to do in practice.
Yep.
And I think that's something that I've been trying to get for this studio to become more formal in that way, in which we can run a project within the university with this methodology for a build thing, a sort of
Yeah.
collaborative. At the moment, the idea is for a collaborative pavilion that we can kind of use the studio as a test to say, okay, we're gonna build a little shed, for example, and we build it in a university space, but we use the system and we get the students then to actually learn how to build stuff. Because I think that's the main disconnection at the moment, right? Like you've got universities pitching these very interesting sort of courses with a lot of freedom to design things that maybe once you actually go out and work in a firm, then you are not capable of doing a project because you've been spending 4 years trying to design this complicated thing, So I think that link needs to be really kind of fostered, and I think that link only happens through two things: drawing and experience in building,
Yeah.
which um, in the country I'm from, it's really linked. Like we architects spend a lot of time on site, and it's very beneficial. We learn a lot there just by learning how people do things and how buildings are put together. Maybe you learn more than in uni, to be honest. Which is it's different in Australia, where the builder and the architect are kind of separate entities, and it's hard for an architect to spend a lot of time on site. I think, yeah, I think it's something that as a profession, as a group of people practicing, we need to come to terms and try to stretch the bridge between school and practice.
Yep. Okay, is that answering the question, Sutramani? Okay.
Thanks, Sutra.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Okay, is there anyone that have another question? Well, this is about the design intent. Oh, is Azra back? Or is I think she have the connection problem. Okay, it's okay. Ada yang mau nanya lagi? Pakai bahasa Indonesia juga nggak apa-apa, nanti saya translate. So most of the student that ask is from the studio level 3. No one's yet from level 5. Where's my level 5 student? This is actually for you guys. But luckily the studio from the level 3, the one that have more question. Okay, so here comes another question. Good evening, Mr. Gomez. My question is slightly related to Mr. Mansuri's question, related to the current pandemic. Sorry. Should this intent be changed if a pandemic occurs in the middle of planning? If we have to change it, is there a way or a factor that must be considered when changing the intent?
I think so. I think events like the one we experienced in the last couple of years, like pandemics, force everyone to change perspective, right? Like I think that coming up with a design intent is not something that you are going to follow to the rule and then like just follow blindly. If there's big things happening, you need to be able to look back and say, okay, what can I do to either integrate the pandemic into what I'm doing, or try to allow my process to create a link with them and to design for that as well. But I think it's something that we're only gonna learn by after the pandemic is over. Like at the moment we've been kind of caught really quickly. So the transition between trying to design for the pandemic and before hasn't really started. Like at the moment, we're still kind of doing the same thing we were doing before, maybe with some social distancing rules and larger spaces, because maybe in the future we won't be able to stand so close of norms in terms of space use. But I think as a little bit more time goes on and we reflect back on what the pandemic was and what the impact was, we will start to think about how to apply, how to work around or with the results of the pandemic. So I think it's early stages, but I'm sure it will have an effect into what we do.
Yeah, for me, it's also change, but you add more of the thing, the intent. You will add more thing that you need to research or what you need to make out of it, like the
Yeah.
project. Yeah.
Well,
So not maybe not changing.
maybe part of your intent is for some flexibility, like the project that you
Yeah.
built in Chile, right? Like
Mm.
maybe your project can provide for something, but there's flexible spaces for other things to happen if a pandemic comes or if whatever scenario you're put in front, right? And it might be as easy as saying, this area in my project is up for grabs. Anything can occur there. Like let's say I'm gonna quarantine a zone of 50 square meters, which now is a garden, very nice garden. But in the future, if we need somewhere to, I don't know, vaccinate people, we can turn that into a quick vaccination spot. Or if, I don't know, there's a problem with food supply, we can turn that into a kitchen or like a soup kitchen. Or if there's a problem with recycling, we can collect stuff there, right? Like it's kind of thinking what else can happen and maybe meeting that into your intent by providing spaces that are flexible. I think this also is kind of tied to the way time that's how it was before, because putting a building up meant symbol of status, symbol of wealth. There's a lot of relationships to what building a building is. But maybe now we can think of buildings that are not meant to be there for 100 years. Maybe we have buildings that are, that you can disassemble and build somewhere else, and that site becomes available for something different. Or maybe we have buildings that will decay, and in 20 years they'll fall apart, and that site will become available for the city again. Who is to say that the, the changes. So the original intent is no longer valid. So it needs to be able to deal with that as well, with time, you know. I think we need to be flexible enough to think that what we build is not like a monument of how good we are and there to be forever there. You know, I think we need to be a bit more kind of sharing this space because we're also running out of spaces in cities, right? Like slowly density is becoming a problem. There's less and less open plots. There's less and less space to build on. So why should my building be there forever? I think we just need
Yeah.
to be open. I think personally that we should be open to that idea that times change, use change. Buildings should either change, be easy to adapt for change, or maybe just put down and build something new that responds to the constraints in that moment in time.
Yeah, like the one that's saying in one of your presentation that building's supposed to perform. So how do we make the building performs by what we need? So maybe not yeah, changing and yeah, we keep adding, but we need to make sure what the intent to for the building. Yeah.
And as I was saying, you know, the very first parts of understanding what's around you, your context, the
Yep.
brief, the site conditions, they are going to give you the intent or the idea for the intent, right? Like by you understanding what's in the site, then you can think about how you interact with it, how you fix things, how you enhance things. But in the future, those things might already be solved by your building, or if the context changes, then your project needs to change with the context.
Yep. Is it answering that? Ahmad, do you have another question? And while you answering the question from Amar, there's already several questions in the chat box. Maybe we go back to Mr. Mansur's question. So during online studio, how is the strategy to develop student computer skills to work on their design project? So maybe basically the use of 3Ds or stuff like that. Yeah, computerized
Okay,
skill. Mhm.
so I think what we like to do is give the students a very clear list of the deliverables they're going to have to produce, right? So the first day of studio, we explain the methodology. I explain the methodology and explain how it's divided and when things are happening. So until meets and this, after meets and that. And I give them a list of drawings. I'm going to need a site plan. I'm going to need 5, you know, floor plans, sections, elevations. They don't know what what the project is, but they know what they need to produce. So in the process, by cataloging, they need to learn if they don't know how to do a section, a plan, an elevation, an axonometric, and they get to choose what their graphical representation is. Right? Again, it's kind of like the idea of you deciding how the building looks like. In my studio, I like them to decide what their graphical representation is, right? If you like your project, your drawings to be black and white and, you know, very, I don't know, lean and very curated, that's fine. But if you like your drawings to be all blue, that's also fine. Or if you like render or you like line work, the way you represent your project is up to you. So that gives the students also the freedom to pursue and to finesse their own, you know, graphical skills. Because I don't think it's about everyone having to draw the same way. It's better if you learn how to draw the wrong way. Because in the end, as I was saying in the second slide, what we do is draw. We draw all day, you know?
Yeah.
We draw for firms and we draw for units and we draw for ourselves. So the earlier you understand how you like to draw and how you are, which tools you're good at, the better. In the end, each drawing should be a tool for you to convey an idea, right? In this, I don't know, in the scenario of a presentation like this one or a presentation to a client, let's say, your drawings need to be specific to say what you want your project to be, right? To explain the intent. But in another context, if you're building a project, your project needs to be at a level that you can communicate with a builder, He can understand what you need done, and he knows what to do. So drawings are tools to convey or to communicate. And there's different ways to convey these ideas, and there's different sort of graphical levels to do. And I think in terms of computer skills, we use Rhino. Like I think it's a tool that we like to use because it's it's um, it's flexible enough for you to model complex things if you're interested in complex things. It allows you to draw from scratch 2D and 3D things in the same space. So AutoCAD, I use a lot of AutoCAD for sort of heavily 2D projects, but we don't like to use in the studio Revit, for example, because it's a bit constraining, right? The Revit families and the Revit sort of plugin stuff and just drag and drop things, they are kind of making some choices for you, right? Like there's already a door there, I'm just gonna drag it in. Then I don't know how to draw a door because it's already drawn. Or I didn't design the door or the window or whatever, right? So I think what we're trying to do is to get them to understand a little bit of how things are put together, which is the largest challenge because it's really hard as well. And a little bit of sort of development, right? That you can really model a window, what you want the window to be, and you can just come up with line drawings, and then those line drawings can become a section or a perspective view or something to to present your work. And hopefully that helps them progress their skills in that software.
Yeah, I think that's quite answering the question. Is it answering your question, Mr. Mansuri? So yeah, basically, for the development of the skills, of course, the student need also want to learn because, like me before, when I was in Australia, I was forced to do but learn Rhino, because if not, my drawing will be shown not as good as the other, because like what Alonso Gex said before, in Rhino they help us to make the lines and the most combination that we want to create, not just copy in here like copy and paste, not like that, but we can make our own drawing like what we want. So basically we start from sketch. If it's from me, we start from sketch and then put it in the 3D modeling too.
Exactly.
So yeah,
So I think just to comment on that, I think there's two things with the online studio. There is this loss, the chance to actually go and look at what your other peers are doing at uni, or asking for help into how to fix this drawing, or hey, I don't know this command, can you help me? That's super important. It's something that needs to be maintained because as a design studio tutors or environment technology tutor, you can only teach so much, right? You need to be teaching the methodology and the project and the program and all these other things, and you cannot really focus on teaching students how to upskill in Rhino. But one thing I do every semester is to do live demonstrations. So I spend one class every semester saying, okay, give me your 3D file with 2 or 3 students, and they say, okay, I'm having issues with this. Can you help me model it? And then I take over their file and I model that for them, and everyone can see. So it's a little bit trying to bridge that gap as well. Sort of, it's kind of fixing on the spot, or it's like, okay, I cannot model this stair. How would you do it? And then we go ahead and model that, and then we look at another project having issues with a specific part, and then we try to model that as well. The trick here is that in 3D software modeling, there's usually more than one way to achieve what you want. There's maybe 6 or 7 commands that you can use to finish with the same thing. So if I like to do things one way, that's all I can teach, but maybe you're better in another command, and there's many ways to come up with that result.
Yep.
Yeah.
True. Okay, thank you, Gex. So another question. Hello, Mr. Alonso. This is from Abdillah. Abdillah, do you want to ask your question by yourself or should I read it?
Ibu aja.
Okay. So hello, Mr. Alonso. What is the strategy to maintain the concept design intent during the construction process, such as a lack of worker performance or in a job that suddenly lacks money? So like that's the constraint. So what happened if it stopped temporarily? And what do you think, sir? So maybe sorry if the question is out of the context, but actually it's not out of context. Maybe it's a little more what in the future things like that. So we
Yeah,
design to build. Yeah, most of the studio we do, like the intent is this building need to be built. How will it look and how do we do it like that? Yeah.
I think
So
I think it's a valid question, Abdillah.
yep.
I
Yeah.
think so far in my experience, I've barely been able to test this methodology in a real project. It's all been in an academic world. So I haven't encountered the problems of maybe, the client lost all this money and we have to stop. Now, if I kind of think about it, I don't think it should change. Like the building is going to perform in a way that you need it to perform, regardless of how much money you put into it. And that's, for example, if you wanted your building to be made out of gold, let's say, the big pieces of gold, and it's super expensive and no one can afford it, but the building was meant to be a kitchen like Caleb's project, it doesn't really matter if it's gold or tiles because the kitchen will work anyway, right? It'd be nice if it was gold and it would be really shiny and expensive, but you can still have a kitchen without the gold. So I think it needs to, at some stage when these projects, if I get the chance to test this methodology further in a real life environment, there is, of course, the constraints of having a budget are enormous, right? Sometimes you cannot build everything. You need to make sacrifices. You need to make
Yes.
changes to the design. You need to go through value management stages to make sure that the client can afford what you're doing. But that means that you need to have a clear idea of what you want to do and maybe start with the basics, like, okay, this is what the building needs to do and the final project needs to operate this way. What's the most basic version to achieve that? And that will probably take you to the most cost-effective version of it as well. You can think then, maybe it's not going to be the most cost-effective today. Maybe you can think of the most cost-effective tomorrow, right? Like, okay, if I put in, let's say, solar panels, today is going to be more expensive than not putting them in. But in 20 years' time, your client will be saving a lot of money in there, right? So I think those are the conversations that you need to kind of start having with your clients in terms of saying, yes, this is what the project needs to do. Second, this is, okay, that's the budget you have. I cannot change that. You're not going to get more money out of nowhere. That's the money you decided on spending in this building.
Yeah. So that's why it's important.
Yeah, what's the main thing that you want to solve? And it's about hierarchy, right? If there's 5 things to solve, there'll be 1 that's more important, 2 less important, 3, 4, 5 all the way up. And we'll try to solve 1 within the budget. And if we have more money, maybe we solve 1 and 2. And we kind of make our way down. And hopefully we can solve all of them within the budget. But some might have to wait for the next project.
Is that answering, Abdillah? But in the end, is you need to make sure later on when you work on the project, you need to ask the owner how much your budget, because if not, the building wouldn't finish if it's low budget like that.
Oh, now that we're on that subject, it's not just that it won't be finished. You will also work triple, because you will document this design. You spend all these hours in this beautiful gold building, and then he'll say, hey, I can afford it. So now you have to make it timber and you have to go and redraw it again. So you're going to spend a lot of time documenting this if you don't know how much it's going to cost.
True. Okay, I think that's answering, Abdillah.
Thanks, Abdillah.
So all of this thing, if you want to ask again, I'll answer it in Indonesian too. I'll translate it if it's if it's okay for more. Okay, so we have 20 more minutes, but I think there's several one more question from May. Dear Mr. Alonso, during the design process, how to keep the process and what we intend to design on track? Because lots of factors that made the process delayed and the intent of the design comes out not as good as we want to. So it's basically like our own idea like that, Gex. What if it's changing?
I think it's, if I'm reading the question correctly, you're saying there's a lot of factors that are there in play, and you come up with this intent, right? So I think my answer to that is to, as I was saying before, like it's more about trying to make sure that you get one right, the important one, and you work towards that. Sometimes there are other things that you can do, right? Like, let's say, additional intents or additional ideas to do. But I think if you really focus on doing one, I think you can do any one if you really focus on that one, right? Regardless of the budget or regardless of other constraints. I think if you really have one thing that you want to solve, enhance, test out, right? If you've got a clear intent, go for that and take a leap of faith. Try to do that. But don't try to do that plus 50 other things, because then it will be impossible, right? So I think the more clear you set out to do something and you know where you're going, then just try to get there. And it's kind of like, course, put the blinkers on, don't look elsewhere, just go there. Yeah, I think that'll be my advice.
Yeah, I know. Like in design, sometimes we need to decrease our ego because of the design sometimes. Like not everything can be achieved if we haven't seen all in the factor. Like we need to a bit content, but we need to try our best to make the intents work like that. Like what Gek said before, Mr. Alonso said before too.
It's a compromise between
Yeah,
achieving the
compromise.
intent, and on the other hand, now that you have the freedom to design whatever you want because you're
Yep.
achieving the intent, making sure that
Yeah.
that whatever you want fits within everything else. That you're not saying the intent is to build a park for the poor people and to connect these two neighborhoods or whatever, but then you're putting on top a 75 tower for the rich people on top of the poor people, right? Like, I think there needs to be a very thin line, or a very well thought of moment where your idea for the building meets the intent, and they need to be really, really closely related as much as possible, both in terms of budget and also in terms of how it looks like in the end, you know.
Yep, I think that's answering the question because me already said thank you, Mr. Alonso. Okay,
Okay,
is
great.
there any question, any other question? No one wants to ask in Indonesian, so I can translate it. Ada yang mau tanya dalam bahasa Indonesia? Jadi, this week we'll be saying about design intent, and then the next week we'll change it to the narrative in design. So the first one, you learn about how the design should follow the intent, not only just a concept, but what you aim in the project. But next lecture, you're gonna learn more about how to get a story about your design. So more narrative in architectural designs and the project representation. So that's why if you still get confused about concept or the intent of your design, please ask the question while you have the time.
We can still revisit that during the
Yep.
next lecture. If you come up with a question in the next couple of weeks and we
Yeah.
meet in the next couple of weeks, then we can ask it again.
Oh, that's good then.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone wants to ask anything again? I think everyone already get tired, guys.
Okay.
No, I think you
Fair
also get
enough.
tired too. No one wants to ask anything anymore. They didn't even reply, right?
Okay.
No,
Well,
I'm just kidding. Yeah.
I'm happy to
Yeah.
take as many questions as you want, and if not, to take as many questions on the next session as well. If you come up with
Yeah.
some in between.
Great. Thank you, Gex.
Brilliant.
So yeah, we appreciate your being with us today, and hopefully for the next two series and more events. And yeah, it's really great to have you, and we discuss about the design intent. So yeah, it is important how to achieve what your aim for the project, not only just giving your concept and how it look like, but why it look like that, and why this building performs like that. You need to know everything about the design intent, as Mr. Gex told us before. So that's all for today. Thank you for all the participants in the lecture series. I hope your knowledge has been expanded by this meeting, and see you on the next series about the narrative in design on 19 November 2020. Have a great evening, everyone. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So, Gex, thank you. I'll see you in 2 weeks for the next series, the Zoom
Thanks,
meeting.
guys. Have a great
Yeah.
weekend, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for having
you
me.
too. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Sad.